So here's chapter 10, and the chapter 10 really is a big sort of a summary topic of all of the pieces and parts put together. Instead of demand and supply, we have aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So aggregate just means total, and you have here aggregate demand. Now here you have, instead of quantity, you have the real GDP, which is essentially the quantity of the output produced in the country. And instead of having prices, you have price level here. So we also have a supply curve, an aggregate supply curve, but for the short run, and it just looks upward sloping like all supply curves do. And this curve is based on the cost of production. So the way that you understand what happens to this curve is simply think of the cost of production. If the costs change, this supply curve will shift. If the cost of raw materials goes up, the supply falls. If the wages rise, the supply falls. If there's a higher corporate taxes, the supply falls. Higher costs, lower supply. Lower costs, increases supply. That's the way it works. Aggregate demand is simply consumption, investment, government spending, exports minus the imports. It's the same variables as you learned earlier with the national accounts. C plus I plus G plus X minus M. That is the aggregate demand. And if any of those variables change, aggregate demand will change. If there's higher government spending, aggregate demand will increase. If there's higher investment, aggregate demand will increase. If there's higher exports, aggregate demand will increase. Okay? We also have the long run aggregate supply curve, which is vertical. And it's vertical because in the long run, the output depends solely on your capital, your labor, and your technology. That is the maximum potential output an economy can produce in the long run. This, therefore, is the potential GDP, and this here is the price level, and there's the equilibrium. This would, of course, be a short-run equilibrium because the short-run supply curve and the aggregate demand intersect. It also is the long-run equilibrium because we're also on the long-run supply curve, long-run aggregate supply curve. This long-run aggregate supply curve will only shift if there's a change in capital, labor, or technology. Okay? So let's do a question here. If money wages falls, what happens? Well, the wage is a cost. If the costs are lower, the supply curve shifts to the right. You're going to have a situation that looks like this. And so the answer is the short-run aggregate supply curve shifts to the right. Circle E.